Honestly, over the last few years, video games have become more accepted as an art form. Like, when you look at a time like the 2000s, it was commonly accepted that only nerds and geeks played video games. Well, if you look at today, games have turned more into a popular form of media. You know, it's not particularly frowned upon if you mention that you've played Animal Crossing in the winter break. Video game adaptations have been getting better and better, and cosplays have become more and more mainstream. So, with video games getting more and more popularized over time, people will try to push the limits of video games more and more as well. And as a result, original genres and ideas keep getting made. But the people I've seen push the boundaries and limits of video games the most are of course indie developers. It's very often that a new game comes out by some indie development team where they figured out how to make a card game interesting or something. They damn well know what they are doing. Indie developers know how to push boundaries because they don't have any big corporation holding them back in case their game will be not marketable enough. But with the creative freedom of indie devs, certain tropes they like to use have been repeated quite a few times now, so much so that I felt like talking about it a little bit and why it is so popular among indie devs. I am of course talking about fourth wall breaking. Most people know what it is, but to quickly explain it, a fourth wall break occurs when a performance or piece of media, whatever thingy, acknowledges the presence of the audience, the camera, or any other observer. In the context of various forms of entertainment, including literature, film, television, and video games, breaking the fourth wall involves a character acknowledging their fictional nature or interacting with the audience in some way. This can induce shock to the viewer because it can pull you out of the immersion. It reminds you that you are merely the entertained watching or interacting with the entertainer. A fourth wall break can be as simple as a character looking at the camera. It can also have an intended humorous effect, like in a superhero movie where Deadpool looks at the camera and says something about you should buy more merchandise. The silly guy. Moving on, fourth wall breaks are done differently in video games, particularly they usually take themselves more seriously when doing it. Of course, silly fourth wall breaks are a thing as well in video games, but I'm more talking about the fourth wall breaks that use it as a narrative. For example, calling out the player for their playstyle, or making the player go into their game files to like delete something so that the story can continue. Fourth wall breaking where the player has to do something outside of the game program or where their actions get judged is honestly an innovation in storytelling. This is because this isn't something you could do with books or movies. They are just simply not as interactive. You can't exactly go into your book files, but with the rise of indie developers trying to be different in a saturated market for games, this fourth wall breaking trope has gone from a niche trope to something you can always expect a little of when trying out new indie games. Moreover, in this video I will talk about this trope, how it became popular, and if this overusing of this trope is a problem or not. However, do not worry, I am not hating on your favorite indie game. The games I will be talking about here have a special place in my heart, especially Undertale, my sweet pookie bear. And I won't spoil too much about the games I will be talking about. I will eventually make a point about why this fourth wall breaking has become such a popular trope in video games nowadays. So if any of this sounds interesting, why not stick around? And I'll do a quick shameless plug and ask if you can subscribe, maybe now or maybe later on. It would mean a lot to me and interactions really help me motivate me to make more videos. Thank you. So, fourth wall breaking has been a thing for a long time, obviously. The first known incident being in 1918, Mary McLean's silent film, quote, Men Who Have Made Love to Me, unquote, in which the author, who portrays herself, interrupts the vignettes on screen to address the audience directly. But that's a silent film and that's boring. The first actual game to include fourth wall breaking was a horror game called Eternal Darkness Scientists Require, developed by Silicon Knights. This game has a bit of a Resident Evil vibe, where you have to investigate in a creepy setting. The game essentially had a sanity meter, where if you were a shitty gamer or just a child in general, the game would punish you if the sanity meter was emptied out. An example of a punishment the game would give the player is walking into a new room and your inventory got cleared and suddenly there's like a ton of monsters on you. And oh yeah, your controller unplugged itself. There are also instances of healing items dealing damage and the game deleting its own save file. Of course, this was revolutionary for its time, and I think it's sad that there aren't many games that really punish you for being not good enough. Modern game reviewers would instantly give it a 0 out of 10. This game, rightfully so, got a lot of positive reviews at the time though, but sadly the sequels got cancelled. Classic Nintendo. This game still left an impact, of course, being a stepping stone for not only the integration of the trope in video games, but also just video games as a whole. Let's look at another one, a game that got released around 2014. This time it's a game called Oneshot. I'm sure you've heard of it at least once. You know, the little cat boy in the thumbnail. If you don't know, Oneshot is a game where you, the player, help a little boy called Niko and guide him through a world filled with robots. In the world, you come across several glitches and a computer tells you that the world Niko is transported to is falling apart, and the only way to save the world is to bring a light bulb, which is the sun of that world, to the top of the tower. Now, I won't spoil the game all too much for any unsuspecting viewers, but essentially this game is packed with fourth wall breaks, and the game isn't afraid to let you know early on. Cheeky things like pop-ups coming on the screen where the game takes your name from your computer, which didn't really work for me considering I spammed my name in my Windows account, or having to go in your game files to find a code for a locked item. And this is usually what people assume fourth wall breaking is in video games. You know, going through your game files to find something and delete something and nothing more. But of course, Oneshot is willing to take it a step further. The game basically makes you, the player, play as some sort of god who has access to more information than the others. Oneshot actually gives the player very interesting puzzles where, for example, the player has to drag the game's window off screen to reveal a code. It takes the game outside of that game window and makes the game also take part of the contents of your computer. And again, I will not spoil too much, but there's even this one character that can only talk to the player through fourth wall breaking, really cementing in the fact that the fourth wall break that is usually used as something that breaks the immersion actually is a massive part of the game and story. There's another route in this game called the solstice route, where essentially it all comes back that the game is, just a game. A game that takes a similar route to this is Undertale, more specifically the genocide route, more on that in a second. Essentially, the game is aware it's a game, but it also acknowledges that it's breaking the fourth wall. It's a lot of meta, okay? Now, usually this is a problem because if a game focuses too much on the fact that it is different and self-aware, then it might overshadow the actual story, and this almost happens with Oneshot, but the game actually integrated the breaks from the immersion quite smoothly, including the mechanics of the game and also the story. And honestly, this game was also a stepping stone for the ones that use fourth wall breaking later on, because it shows us how fourth wall breaks can be used in really creative ways, especially in a complicated form of media like video games. It shows that fourth wall breaking can be used to tell stories and in many different ways, and in ways that you just don't get tired of, right? Now, after the success of Oneshot, which in my opinion is still underrated, it seems like a lot of indie devs got inspired by storytelling through connecting the realm between the game and the player. So Oneshot did it in a way where we as the player were sort of a positive part of the lore. We were the god trying to help Niko. So what about games where we play a negative role? Well, a game that released a year later certainly did that. I'm of course talking about Undertale. Yay! Let's shine a spotlight on the genocide route in particular, where the game confronts you with your sins, literally with an in-game karma debuff during the Sense fight. And there's just this level of genius where Sense doesn't really spit meta nonsense at you. He makes you really question your morality. Why reset your files? Why do you have to try every ending you can do? And for even better or worse, he doesn't remember the resets. He just knows they are a thing. He doesn't even know if he's done this hundreds of times before. This isn't a Deadpool wink at the camera, this is a gut punch that leaves the pressure on the player. Constantly you are reminded of your actions, which is sort of also breaking the fourth wall, where Frisk shouldn't be blamed for their actions, but instead you. Here again, fourth wall breaking is used as a narrative device. At the time it really broke expectations. I mean, you had to be there when Undertale blew up. People were hooked with this storyline, which makes it even sadder that a lot of people misinterpreted the story as like, wow, Kara's really bad. But after Undertale, it seems like games breaking the fourth wall really seem to just blow up. You had the release of Doki Doki Literature Club, which made the acknowledgement of an observer more of a motivation for a character, Monica, to get closer to the player. You had Super Hot, which paled in comparison to the Simpsons game, and you had the beloved game Inscription, which just give me a second to talk about the story really quickly, because I mean, it acknowledges it's a video game, but it's still a game in a story that somehow connects to the devil making a card code that ended up in Hitler's pocket. Confusing. But so many games try to follow the same formula of shocking the player with a constant reminder of, hey, you're a sad loser playing a video game, cool, huh? And it worked usually. I mean, it's only fair that pieces of media that shock the player or have an interesting way of bringing over the story or narrative to get popular. When games like these get released, they usually are all over your YouTube homepage, where Markiplier is probably playing it. The rise of this trope is very much linked to the desire of indie developers to stand out in a crowded market. In their quest for uniqueness, they've latched onto fourth wall breaking as a means to engage players in ways traditional storytelling cannot. But the more frequently this technique is used, the risk increases of turning it from an innovative narration method to a predictable trope. Usually when there's this new big indie game hit, there's a high chance it will be Five Nights at Freddy's 2, or just another game that breaks the fourth wall. Or incest games, if you're into that. So what's the deal? Why is it so overused? Well, one could argue that interactivity is a big part of video games. Isn't interactive interacting with the game and pressing a button you see appear on screen technically breaking the fourth wall already? Well, it's almost as if acknowledging the player is a fundamental part of video games medium of itself. It would only make sense that a media that is so reliant on someone interacting with it would put focus on the person playing it. You see what I'm trying to say? Books have a power to tell a story with detailed sentences on how a particular leaf looks the way it does, or to tell you what a character is thinking internally. A visual artwork like a painting puts focus on, its visuals, and also on how to make you think, make up a story, without it being literally able to tell you a story like a book. And video games have visual, musical, and just so many more powers combined, so it can perhaps make it easier to break the rules of storytelling that were set by the other forms of media. Fourth wall breaking is the ultimate nod to the player's influence. It's a technique that resonates deeply with indie developers. And I guess another reason it could be used so often is again because indie developers work on their own or with a small team. Yes, they can have more experimentation, but it also provides a clever workaround for them facing resource problems. Indie devs might not have the budget for a big sequence or big open environments, but they have other storytelling powers to make the experience more memorable. So it's a cost-effective but good way to create an interesting narrative and world/lore building. Sadly, with any trend, there is a risk of oversaturation. The more fourth wall breaking becomes a go-to tool for indie developers, the more it loses its freshness. Now, this isn't me saying that literally all indie developers do it and that the ones that do actually do it are lazy, but when some developers continue to explore the boundaries of storytelling, it becomes important to maintain the whole surprise factor that made fourth wall breaking captivating in the first place. You see, it was interesting when games do it in new ways, like literally making you a part of the story back then, but as it becomes more popular, then I'm gonna be afraid that it might slowly transform into the typical dead whoop wink at the camera, expected and without any charm. It would suck if the supposed interesting trope of the fourth wall breaking would turn into Rick and Morty meta slob, if you catch my drift. To make a comparison, you could look at romance movies. Now, some do it well, but most of the time they're all the same, especially the Christmas ones. This happened because the trope basically got overused so much, it didn't really have any potential left anymore. Now, you could argue that it won't happen with indie games because they're original, yada yada, but you get my point. Now, this all sounds dramatic, but I'm sure it won't be a pitfall for game storytelling. I guess I made this video more as a warning. Look, I love certain games that use fourth wall breaking as a trope, but I hope it doesn't get used just because it's an easy way to get popular. I mean, maybe the trope will blow over, or maybe it will stay just as interesting as it is now, but that is all just speculation. All in all, I think most people just forget about how video games as a media form can just do so much, and I wonder what we will be able to do with it in the future. Like, imagine the shit you can do with the VR, and if other senses like touch and smell could be a part of video games later, like imagine the boundaries we could push with us finally being able to smell Arthur Morgan's sweaty armpits. Thank you for watching all the way through. Give some of your opinions in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video somehow, then I would appreciate you subscribing or maybe even joining my Braindead Discord server. Thank you!